So let's just get straight to it. We got a lot to talk about. And speaking of a lot to talk about, Phil Spencer had a lot to talk about this week about Xbox Series X. He went on, I believe it was like the 1,000th episode of GamerTag Radio. And look, I've never listened to that show, and I don't know those guys, but respect. If you're at episode 1,000 of your show, you're absolutely doing something right. And I think Phil Spencer recognized that and decided to go on their show. And boy, oh boy, was he chatty. Did you get to check out any of the stuff from this?
I didn't hear any of it, but I saw like articles about it or like, tweets about what he said.
Oh, it's insane. First of all, he was on there for a really long time. It's the longest Phil Spencer interview maybe ever. But he's on a podcast. You can't just show up for like 3 minutes and give your bullet points and get out. Like, you have to be a part of the show. So this was a great forum for him to explain a lot of stuff that's going on with Xbox Series X. And probably the most profound quote from the week that has been kind of making the rounds through social media is that Phil said that he does not consider Xbox Series X to be competing with other consoles. He says their competition is Google and Amazon. Now,
which is pretty much what I said last week.
It's what Pachter has been saying for like a year. I mean, he's been saying Amazon and Google are really the competition going forward. Phil Spencer acquiesced to that and agreed and said that's really kind of who we're targeting to go after.
Because at this point, Sony is the devil they do know, and they'd rather deal with that. I think. Google, I mean, I feel like at this point they're probably relaxing a bit when it comes to Google, but you still don't know what Amazon's going to do next.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it as like deflection on Phil's part. Like him trying to say, and Nintendo used to do this too, it would say, they're not really our competition, and they only say that so that you don't compare them to them, so you can't see that they're getting their butts kicked. So this could be the same strategy from Phil, where he's just trying to say, well, we don't really want to compete with PlayStation because we're probably not going to win. So let me pick some opponents that I think we have a shot at beating. And in his opinion, that was Stadia, Google, and Amazon, whatever Amazon ends up doing. Everyone knows at this point Amazon is just a matter of time until it announces its game streaming initiative. So that, to me, was a big deal, that he decided that PlayStation wasn't their big competition anymore, that it was these streaming guys. I think it shows the emphasis on Xbox Game Pass and services from Microsoft going forward, that it has been its focus for a while. I don't want to completely sort of short Phil, because he's been talking about this stuff for a while. And when they stopped giving out sales figures and started giving out, like, subscription numbers for Game Pass and how many subscribers they have to Xbox Live, they've kind of been following this strategy for a while. I just kind of thought that with the new hope of a new platform, that maybe they might at least try to engage with PlayStation for the first year until you kind of realize that, yeah, that's not going to work out too well in our favor. It might. I mean, they might win this generation. So I think that's a little bit short-sighted, but I also feel like that's Phil just kind of covering his tail. And I'm sure that's the messaging internally as well, as, well, we're not really competing with PlayStation. We're competing with these other guys. It could be considered smart. It could be considered sneaky. I think it all depends on your perspective. So about 3 weeks ago, real images of Xbox Series X emerged on the internet, and someone had taken photos of the back of the Xbox Series X. And there was a port there that people were confused over. And a lot of people thought maybe it was for debug only, and it was some special port that only the debugs have. Well, no, it's turned out that that port is used for extra memory, so for like an external drive. Now, the question becomes, does that external drive also have to be an SD drive?
I would think it would.
Yeah, and that external SD drives are really, really pricey.
They can be. I mean, you can get a good deal here and there on an SSD.
It's hard to find. I mean, we look for them when we curate on SIFTD, and once every like 4 or 5 months, there's a pretty good deal on them. But they're usually internal, not external.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, I think you're just the speed at which these systems are going to load and expect to load, like you just can't use 7600 or 7200 anymore. I mean, I'm already running into that problem with my external drives on the current systems, where I could, the Xbox One takes forever to load up all the stuff that's on the external drive. So it
takes forever to load up the things that are on the internal drive.
Yeah, I mean, I hope
not for yours, but my base model does.
Yeah, I mean, it still takes a while on the X, but like, Better, but still too slow to be acceptable, I think. Sometimes you have to sit there and watch it populate for a long... I mean, I have like 100-something games installed, but like sometimes you just have to sit there and like wait for it all to pop in.
Doink, 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 doink. Yeah, all showing up in sequence.
I think that kind of user experience is not going to be acceptable in the next generation, at least in the way that they're going to be pushing it. And certainly showing that, like, the first thing Sony showed off was how fast Spider-Man loads now, and for the fact that it really doesn't load. Yeah. So I think SSD is going to be required unless you're going to be hamstringing the OS at this point.
I don't know if you noticed or not, but in the last couple of months, even the PlayStation 4 OS has gotten slow. So the PlayStation 4 desktop now, it's not quite as slow as Xbox One, but it's slow. Like, compared to how it was at launch, it's at a kind of a crawl now. I don't know why that is. I don't know why it's gotten so much worse over the last couple months, but it has. There's really bad delay when you go to switch through. I'll just call them blades because that's kind of what we call them after the initial launch of the Xbox 360. But yeah, just swapping through the stuff, there's a lag now.
I haven't seen that.
And I have a PS4 Pro as well, so it's not like I'm on a base model there. But I've noticed that. I think it's just the way things go. It's like as time goes on, you keep building and building on top, and you're always trying to manage the speed with the functionality. And I think maybe that the scales got tipped a little bit in the wrong direction over here the last couple of months. Maybe they can fix it, but I've had a lot of problems.
I haven't had any issue with that. I mean, I haven't used the PS4 that much. Yeah, but I haven't noticed anything.
I use it every night, so I've like really noticed it.
I have noticed slowness in the store, like just loading. Images that are just like it crawls sometimes, especially around the holiday sale. It was having trouble with that.
A lot of people are probably using it. Makes sense.
But I haven't noticed too much problems switching around. And I have noticed some slowness in downloading stuff to install to an external drive because I only recently got an external drive for the PS4. Because originally I had a 2 terabyte. I swapped out the internal hard drive with a 2 terabyte. And that was great, but it was just too full, and I couldn't keep deleting stuff and still keep up. So I got an external, and it works, but it's not. The PS4 doesn't do that as well as the Xbox, and we lost power at one point because of the storm, windstorm, like a couple weeks ago. And of course, I forgot. The PS4 was asleep, and I turned it back on. It's like, oh, the disc is damaged. You have to repair it, and I got to go through all this stuff. Whereas the Xbox, just like, oh, you lost power. Yeah, whatever, we're good.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
So Sony's not quite. I mean, but Microsoft makes OSs, so they do have an advantage there. But,
how big do you think the hard drives are going to be on these consoles?
I'm just going to go with not big enough.
Right. I mean, they're really expensive. Yeah. Even if you're buying in bulk, it's still really expensive.
I mean, I would expect 1 terabyte.
I think that's
way
like
too small.
Best case scenario. Yeah, and I think you're right. It's way too small. And then if you're to expand that, obviously Series X has the port there. You're going to drop another $100 on an external drive.
So what is the port then?
What kind of port is it specifically?
Because why wouldn't it just be a USB-C?
I don't know.
And call it a day? Like, is it
it's
some
like a
custom thing?
Yeah, I don't know if we can. Actually, the trailer doesn't show it. It's just in those photos. It's I've never seen a port like it before. It's like this slit that's like about this long and about that thick. I don't know what it is, but that's what they figured out over time is that it's for external storage expansion.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I'm guessing they're going to need, and I'm wondering too if you can just use a regular external drive and it's just going to be slower. Which would defeat the purpose of, some of the new functionality of the consoles.
So that's a choice you can make.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the choice is in your hands, I'm okay with it. They're not forcing anything on you. And truth be told, for the first year you own your console, a terabyte's going to be enough. One, the games are going to be slow to be coming out. There's not going to be an avalanche of games. That's generally year 2 and year 3. And, I think we've all gotten used to at this point to kind of keeping the games that we play a lot on our hard drive, and then the stuff like the single player stuff that you play, finish, you're done, kind of putting that on, taking it off as they come and go. So I think we've been prepared a little bit for that over this last generation of consoles. So I don't think it'll be too big of a deal, but we'll see. A lot of it's going to depend on the price of those external drives too, I think. They could be really, really pricey. Phil also shared that he has been using the Xbox Series X at home for a while now. So the hardware is finished. They have the first versions of the hardware off the assembly line. He said that pretty much everyone at the internal Xbox team has them at home now. They've been using them. That is really, really good. That means all the kinks are going to be worked out beforehand. He's been testing backwards compatibility on his. And by the way, if you want to follow him on Xbox Live, his playlist is kind of a list of games that are going to work with backwards compatibility on day one. He's been going through all the games, checking them if there's problems. Obviously, he notifies the team. But what did he say? There's like 400 or a couple hundred games he's already confirmed that are working with the backwards compatibility on Series X. That's pretty good if you ask me. Let's see. Some other notes that I have.
As long as Ninja Gaiden works.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I want to reiterate because they are the source of this information. This is coming from the GamerTag podcast. If you want to check those guys out, I want to give them credit for all this. One thing that Phil said is the Xbox wants to be different going to the next generation, and the strategies will be different. He said the reveal at the Game Awards was just the first step. No one expected it. Microsoft wants to continue doing this. So it sounds like expecting new information about Series X at the usual places, like maybe a GDC or an E3. Maybe that's not going to be the case going forward. Maybe it's adopting kind of Sony's strategy.
Yeah.
Interesting, nevertheless. Gamers are playing games on tons of devices nowadays, and it's important for Microsoft to support as many as they can. He said that's why there are going to be no exclusive first-party Xbox Series X games at launch. Because he said he didn't want any game to be limited to just that console during the first year or two of the device. So it sounds like the first 2 years.
Sell to that install base.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first 2 years of Series X, you're going to be able to play all its games on the older models, which is great.
Or PC.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't necessarily incentivize people to pick up the new hardware, but Microsoft isn't concerned about that, really. No. It doesn't care. If it's losing money on each Series X, it probably would prefer if you stuck on the old consoles.
This is entirely about ecosystem, like we've said for a long time.
It is. He also talked about Japan. Now, Japan has been a nightmare for Xbox from day one. Like, the first Xbox had a little bit of a foothold. Like, I remember going to Japan during that generation, and you go into a game store, and it would be like, the whole store was like PS2.
Oh, yeah.
There'd be like a 20-foot section for GameCube, and then there'd literally be like a 4-foot section with Xbox stuff.
Yeah, like sometimes there was a bigger Dreamcast section.
Still at that point. Yeah, absolutely. And since then, it's only gotten worse. Like the last time I was in Japan, I couldn't find Xbox anything anywhere. So it has struggled to do well in Japan. It has tried to do well, or at least it used to try to do well. We're actually going to talk about a game a little bit later in the show that was one of Microsoft's efforts to kind of crack into that market. But it has tried, and it just hasn't managed to succeed. The thing is, Phil's not ready to give up. Like, he's not giving up on Japan. He said they haven't signed any exclusive games from Japanese developers yet, but he's looking into it, and it's something that they're considering. And yet they asked him about first-party Xbox games for Japan. He said there's nothing to announce, which means no. That's probably never, ever going to happen. He said he knows it's important, but is it really all that important to the Xbox business? I think
at this point you can't be counting on it one way or the other.
I think it's important to the otaku who wish that Xbox had a bunch of Japanese games that were exclusives, but
nobody bought them. So I mean, there was that period where you had Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon, and they had the Mistwalker stuff. They tried it. It just didn't catch.
It didn't stick. Could Microsoft buy a Japanese studio and fix a lot of problems? Like, what if it bought From Software?
I mean, they could. I don't really see what that would solve.
I mean, then it's like a token.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But and I just, it doesn't seem like they have the greatest track record working with Japanese developers, Scalebound.
Absolutely true.
So I don't know if that's even really worth pursuing at this point.
I don't know if Japan is worth pursuing in general for Xbox.
I mean, Japan is mostly ruled by mobile at this point, so I don't even know if that matters, especially if you're going more of an ecosystem focused, Western style.
Maybe it
PC
is smarter to do what they're doing,
so, yeah.
Which is, you know what, you can play our games on your mobile phone, or you can play it on your PC at home, or whatever.
And they'll welcome multi-platform stuff. The Yakuza games are coming and all this. Everyone's invited, but they seem kind of done trying to sway people with Japanese content as some sort of incentive to buy an Xbox.
Yep.
And it's hard to blame them.
I don't
blame them. It just feels like you're never going to make headway there. So just save your resources for something more worthwhile.
I was surprised they even kept trying through this 360 era. I mean, after what happened with the original Xbox, I was like, oh. You probably should just bail on this, but they tried again.
Although, if you would like to try again with a new Jet Set Radio, I would take that.
I can think of a lot of games.
Or a Jet Set Radio Future. I'd like to see that become backwards compatible. Phil, if we're working on that. That'd be cool. That's a lost game.
It is.
It was exclusive to the original Xbox, and there's no other way to play it. So
yeah, it's true.
Bring that sucker forward. I'm sure there would be some music licensing you had to do, but like, I'd like to play Jet Set Radio Future again. Yeah,
that's a good idea. And then the final kind of bit, and look, there's more. Again, I highly recommend going and listening to the GamerTag podcast. The last big bullet point was that Microsoft doesn't want anything to do with VR. I mean, that's the Crib Notes version. I mean, it took him 1,000 words to say it, but ultimately Microsoft doesn't want anything to do with VR. He said they're not going to do it until it becomes, and this is a quote, a no-brainer, meaning that it's just so overwhelmingly...
It's such a staple that everybody has to have it.
Yep.
Which makes sense at this point. Because they haven't just dove in. If you get sunk costs like Sony does, you got to keep chasing that dragon. But
Microsoft is smart.
Microsoft stayed out. I mean, they sunk their own costs into the HoloLens crap.
That's true.
But they didn't put it out as a product
commercially.
So they didn't go all the way with that one, and I think that was wise.
Yeah, they don't have warehouses full of HoloLens sitting around unsold.
No.
That was
$3,000.
Yeah,
AR
that's
stuff.
not how they operated with their headset. The only headset that they have put out, really. They did do the Windows mixed media headsets or whatever. They tried to work with those. That didn't work.
That whole thing has proven to be a massive bust. It's about that and was it Magic Square?
Oh, Magic Leap.
Magic Leap, that's right.
Which is that now fired half its staff and is it's not going to last. I said that we've been saying that all along about Magic Leap. Augmented reality just hasn't really caught on with the mainstream because people can do it on their phones. They're like, why do I need to buy glasses or a headset?
Well, and also it's not what you think you see when they do the big presentations and you see Minecraft sitting on the table and then you go and actually try it and the viewing angle is 30% of your vision cone.
You can't move. You have to sit perfectly still.
It's not like VR where you put it on and it's better than you imagined.
Right.
HoloLens was always
worse.
Less. It's
it's true. It doesn't look like they're going to go into VR. He also said that right now he feels like most of the games are really just demos. A lot of them are plagued with performance issues, and then there's other problems with motion sickness. So it's hard for me to argue against Microsoft, its plan. It's smart, Sony has invested a ton of money in PlayStation VR. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that they ended up selling 5 million of them, but that's still not scale, really. I mean, when you're talking about the PlayStation 4 just went over, 108 million sold or something absurd. In 5 million, that's just a drop in the bucket for PlayStation VR. So I think Microsoft's doing it the right way. For right now, I think VR does best on PC. Although, the Series X is a pretty beastly PC that they're putting out. Yeah. So I could see it maybe coming online in a couple years. And it's not even something Microsoft is going to have to worry about. They could probably have the HMD manufacturers work on the libraries and getting it up and running on the hardware. So I think that's the right call. In 2020, I think that's the right call. We'll see as time changes, though. So there you go. More and more details coming about Xbox Series X. On the flip side, we have PlayStation, which was supposed to have an event this week. It didn't have
Rumored,
it.
But
now it's looking like GDC is going to be at least something for PlayStation 5.
DICE coming up. Somebody might say something.
DICE.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of developers.
It is, but it's also
sitting around getting drunk, playing blackjack.
Drunk developers talk.
They do.
So we might find out a couple
Something
of things.
Something could leak out. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I do remember sitting at the bar at DICE a couple times and people...
DICE is where I've heard the craziest stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes years to figure out what they were talking about.
Yeah.
That was that.
Why is it that event, the developers talk?
Because it's so hard to get in.
I guess.
And if you're there, they assume you're part of the club, kind of thing. Which I was at the time.
I remember.
I haven't gone to that in forever. I like DICE a lot.
It's fun. I mean, it's a big party with
it's a big party, and it's where you're most likely to get one-on-one hangout time with the big luminary people. It's where I probably talked the most to people like Ken Levine and actually I was on a panel with him at PAX, so I talked to him. But you can just go up to everybody and
they're just there,
and Will Wright will talk to you for hours about robots, and it's just great. It's a lot of fun.
I went to DICE the year that Microsoft bought Rare, and for journalists, there's not a lot going on there. It's not like a typical trade show
not at all. It's
where
not
there's
at all.
kiosks set up and there's all this stuff. Like it's mostly this big room where everybody goes for like the presentations and the awards, and then people just party.
Hang on. The presentations are usually really interesting. We did the awards show. Like we produced and hosted the awards show with XPlay for years.
That's right.
And I started getting in because one year they came to us and they're like, well, we got to do this like Lifetime Achievement Award like montage segment for Sid Meier. And the people was going to do it can't do it. So can you do it in like 2 days? And I was like, my boss came up was like, you think you could do that? And I'm like, for Sid Meier? Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
I can.
Yeah.
And I got to our fastest editor, Justin Dornbush, and we just threw that thing together in 2 days. And they're like, awesome.
They loved it.
They loved it. I still use the bag they gave me as a present from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, for a couple of years I got to go and went a couple of times, and it was great. And but yeah, I don't know what you do for like a news, like a journalism side thing, but in terms of just sort of networking and meeting people, it's amazing.
Well, to finish my story, so I'm there and I'm talking to somebody about a rare game. And somebody comes up to me and they're like, oh, you're talking about our game. Mm-hmm. And I was like, your game? And he's like, yeah, I work at Rare. And I was like, it was the first time I ever met someone from Rare in person. Like, literally, they used to be like just shuttered. Mm-hmm. You could never interview anyone from there.
They're also off, like they were off in the middle of nowhere in England.
Yeah, in the country. And I was like, holy crap. I'm like, I've been doing this for like 15 years. I've never met someone from Rare. And he's like, well, you're going to start seeing us now because the purchase had just happened. And he's like, oh, this is a whole new life for us now. Like, Nintendo was keeping Rare.
Wait until you see the bottom of the Avatar's shoes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he didn't even know what was coming at that point. He's just like, Nintendo isn't going to keep us behind closed doors anymore. We can actually like talk to people now. And he just started spilling his guts to me about everything. About like Banjo 3, about what happened with Nintendo. I was like, holy crap, I can't believe you're telling me this stuff. There is an interview with him. It's probably lost on the internet now, but I did eventually get a crew and come over and get him to say a bunch of stuff on camera about it. But that's the type of stuff that happens at DICE. And that's why people go, but it's also why I haven't been there in a long time because there's no coverage.
Right.
So, but something could leak out of there.
For people like us, I think DICE is an indulgence.
For sure.
Basically.
For sure.
Like you're not going to get a lot of traction story stuff out of it.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that we do get details at GDC than DICE.
Official details, yeah, but I still think a couple people might say the same.
Like I may get like a DM or like an instant message from somebody who's like, oh, I just heard this here, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, you have to take it with a grain of salt, although stuff that comes from DICE is pretty reliable.